When did you first pick up the bass guitar, and what made you do that?
Picked up the bass when I was about 11 actually, 11. It was definitely 11 actually, because I started off, there was a guy at our school who taught mandolin, and we all started, but this guy was incredibly cool, and there were about a group of 3 of us who started playing the mandolin, and we were in a band, you know, and I'm at a boarding school, so you could play and practice all the time. And it was that thing where, well, we need a bass player because the guitarist was better than me. So I was happy to go on bass. So my mum, I remember, obsessed about this satellite bass. And finally, I think she could see that I was totally committed to it, and they finally went and bought me this bass. And that would have been a big thing for them, you know, to fund that. But yeah, so I can remember 11 years old, that bass was, you know, just used to sit there. I used to just look at it. Yeah, so yeah, 11 years old.
You still got that bass?
No, I've got rid of that a long time ago. I should have kept it for,
just for posterity.
Yeah, I should have done that.
I first started playing the piano at 5 or 6 years old, and it was watching my father improvise on the piano that drew me to it. Like I shared, I had these amazing trips of the imagination listening to the music he would show me, and I found the same occurrence happened when I improvised on the piano. So I was around 6, I would just bang away at the piano for hours a day, entering these fascinating new worlds that the music seemed to evoke. I'm an only child, but my parents are foster carers, so from quite a young age I had foster brothers and sisters.
And were they musically minded as well?
Most of them haven't been. I've tried to drag them into it. Some of the recent foster kids my parents are looking after are really open-minded, and we've had some studio sessions. I love doing studio sessions with non-musicians because they think differently about music, and they do things that aren't expected. So I've really enjoyed those sessions.
That was, I can't remember the exact time, but I remember I was quite young. I was at school, and I just joined. This whole interview is going to be dotted with embarrassing memories from me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's when I joined the boys' brigade when I was a young little boy, and you could play the bugle or you could play the snare drum. So I chose to play the snare drum. I'm not exactly sure why. It just kind of thought, oh, that'll do. It's big. It looks like it'd be fun. So that was the first time I picked up drumsticks, and we used to march through the streets every Sunday. With the whole band, if you like, because obviously the boys' brigade was attached to the church. So we'd all get done in little boys' brigade uniforms, and I'd have my snare drum, and there'd be about, I don't know, 40 or 50 of us, a kind of big marching band. And my mum always gleefully tells me the story that she'd watch, and whenever this big marching band would come down the street, everyone would be all kind of prim and proper and playing the bugles and playing the snare drum, and I'd always be, yeah, this is great, I'm having a great time, you know, really into it. So I think as soon as I started playing, then I got excited, and that was the start of me. It was quite a long time from that point when I actually did it properly, but that was the first time I kind of realised music was something special, and in that case drums at that point.
I sang because I was the one that could sing. It was literally, I was, you know, the others wouldn't, so I had to, and that was it. So that's what it was, and suddenly when you start getting gigs and you have to start performing, that's a different craft again. So you know, the wise man dies many times before he's born. You know, so it's one of those things. Again, you kind of go out, you do a horrendous, make a fool of yourself, and pick yourself up, and get back in, and just keep going again. I don't know why you do it, because it's a labour of love. Yeah. You know, it really is. It's a labour of love, and not easy. It's quite soul destroying at times. Sure. But you know, for some reason, I kept going because I loved it.
My godparents, or my sister's godparents, their son had a drum kit. I was about 8, 10, and that was I just walked in the room and I just saw this big kit, and I just was just like blown away by it, and I just picked up the drumsticks, started hitting everything, and that's kind of when I really wanted to become a drummer, as early as that. You know, it was just like the whole excitement of this big kit. Like, you know, you normally see them and you can't touch them, and there's me, I'm hitting them, and then that was my first experience. And then I didn't actually start playing drums straight after that. Maybe it was another few years later. I joined an academy, and I joined it because I had a drum kit, and I took a few lessons because I joined an orchestra. And the funny thing is, when I was in my drum lessons, I loved it. When I did the orchestra practice, I was like almost scared to hit the drums. I was like always fading in because we had music, and I could read, but I couldn't read that well, the music, and I was always faking it. Basically, we used to call it faking it, fading in your parts, you know, and hoping that the conductor doesn't notice that you're not really playing your parts. So yeah.
I hope he wasn't like the guy from Whiplash.
Yeah, no, it wasn't as bad as that. But I remember he did stop the whole orchestra once and call me out in front of everybody, and asked me to play my parts, and that was just, it was the worst thing that could ever happen. I didn't know what I was doing. Do you know what I mean? And then you've got like 20 or more eyes on you, just waiting for you to play, and it's just so embarrassing. But still, it was a good experience. You know, it just meant you have to learn your parts.
Fairly much as soon as the piano arrived, my mother started sending us to piano lessons. So she always knew that it was very important to be able to read music if you want to develop, you know, the full gamut of skills. So we went to piano lessons, and that kind of, I gradually built up the skills of being able to read. It's a slow process, so anyone that's starting out and starts playing the piano and finding it really tough, don't give up, by the way, because it's really, you've got to get to that point where you can play your right hand and you can read the music. It becomes more fluent doing that. Of course, then you've got to put the left hand, and then this breaks down, and then gradually it clicks a bit and you can play the two together, and then everything just gets more and more natural until the point where you then start to really enjoy what you're doing. So I got to that point. And
doing grades, did you do all the time?
I did grades, although I only did, my first grade that I did was 5, because you don't have to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way through. And then, because I had to do 5, because they needed grade 5 to get into the Clarendon Music College. And then the next grade I did was 8, because I needed grade 8 to get into Trinity College of Music in London when I was 18. Yeah. And then I did the diploma, which is what I needed to pass my degree course. Particular skill that I developed quite early on, which has been very, very useful to me, and a lot of people that have it find the same. And those that don't have it, wish they had it, is reading music at sight. You know, somebody throws something in front of you, so play that. And it's like, unfortunately, you know, unless it's ridiculously difficult, I'm pretty good at that. Yeah. And people say, oh, well, you know, how do you practice sight reading? How did you get to be able to do that? And my own particular experience was that I threw myself in the deep end. I didn't actually volunteer, but I was volunteered to be the pianist for our school choir, our college choir at Trinity College, and they used to throw all kinds of ridiculous stuff at me. You know, William Walton, Belshazzar's Feast. It's like, you can't busk that. It's not, you're not going from E minor to D major. You can't make it up as you go along. This is specific notes, and being put under such a pressure situation, put yourself under pressure, get yourself out of your comfort zone. Yeah. That's always a big thing.
Yeah, my mother had a folk group that used to come round and sing Puff the Magic Dragon and stuff like that, and Michael Row the Boat Ashore, you know, with their mates. And this one guy, you know, he had a sort of, you know, long hair and a beard and a bit of a beer gut and a check shirt, and he had this massive Levin acoustic guitar, which he used to, and I just loved the whole sight of it as a small kid. That was fascinating to me, so I got him to show me how to play a chord on it. And I think I was only about 7 or 8, something like that. And it wasn't, I didn't really start to learn properly until I was about 11 years old. But I started writing songs straight away, and I got into bands when I was 13 and was being paid to play. So I obviously took to it really quickly, but that was the first thing, you know, and I think I had a guitar that was virtually unplayable as my first instrument. Someone gave me this acoustic guitar, which was borderline a toy, really. So not really, you know, when you get an instrument that's so cheap, in those days it just wasn't really playable. But very soon I wanted something where it did stay in tune, and it did sound in tune when you played chords on it and things like that. So I had a lot of help from my parents, a lot of supportive help about that when they realised I it was something I was really interested in.
Yeah. And did you do the acoustic and electric thing in parallel, or did you?
Not really. I very soon concentrated on electric guitar. You know, I did concentrate on that. It wasn't, in fact, until years later that I really began to realise that being a good acoustic guitarist and being able to play with your fingers rather than just a pick is a very good idea. And I got the opportunity to do it even in my 40s. I spent a 10-year stint with a lady called Sarah Jane Morris, who's a lovely singer. You might remember her from the Communards, Don't Leave Me This Way. She had a massive voice, you know, tons of red hair. She's got a band with a guy called Dominic Miller, was one of her guitarists, who plays with Sting. Now Dominic's a classical guitarist and plays nylon guitar, and I had to replace him in Sarah's band at one point, so I figured, well, I've got to learn to do this now, you know, play a nylon guitar with my fingers and be able to play any style of Sarah's things with it, jazz things, funk things. And I started to do that, and now it's a very important thing for me to sit down with a nylon guitar or an acoustic guitar for a lot of the time at home, because the skills you get from the acoustic thing go into your electric playing. They come out the other end, and it doesn't really go the other way. If you always play electric guitar, you can always cover a myriad of mistakes with the sound, you know. But you then pick up an acoustic guitar and you might be a bit rough. If you get stuff really accurate and great on a nylon guitar or an acoustic guitar, you then pick up the electric guitar and you're a better electric guitarist for it.
It was really exciting because it was a Christmas present,
Yeah.
and I was going to get lessons. My feeling about that was excitement. I'd already started the piano and did that for about 8 months before I got the violin. I'm not sure why my mother chose the violin, but in the end that was the instrument that I chose to follow.
And did you continue with the piano and violin simultaneously?
Oh
or
yeah,
did you-
yeah, till I was about 15, yeah. I don't know, I was quite a good pianist. But when I got to music college, the quality of the pianos were really terrible, which is a real shame. It's a real shame, because they put them in the practice rooms, and you know, if you want to make a good sound, you just can't.
Yeah.
So I just stopped playing completely on the
And I
piano.
guess you can play your own violin, so you know.
Oh yeah, exactly. But I mean, I now, you know, that piano's for me and my daughter.
Yeah.
But you've got to have a good sound to start with,
Yeah.
as in you've got to be able to hear something good coming back.
Yeah.
Makes a big difference.
Yeah.
I'm a very late starter, and I didn't pick up a guitar till I was 17. I think probably my mum bought me one for my 17th birthday. I remember the first day I had it, I was trying to write music on it rather than learn the basics, and that's completely wrong, and I probably should have been learning the basics of being a guitar player but I wasn't. It just wasn't what I was, you know. I probably instinctively I was thinking I'd taken this up very late, and you know, there are clearly musicians that have dedicated their lives to being great players, and I was never going to be at that level. But it was always the writing that drew me, and so I had a couple of tape recorders which I sort of hooked up and was writing stuff on literally on the first day. And then I spent I took a year out before I went to university, and you know, just sat there learning scales and things, and drove my stepdad completely insane with this repetitive practice routine that one has to do. And then a short while after that, I did take up classical guitar lessons, and I got reasonably proficient on classical guitar. So there was a kind of period where I was, you know, at a reasonable level of guitar playing. And then, but really, I've always been sidetracked by writing. You know, for me, that's the crucial thing. Is it's the enjoyment I get out of music more than anything else is that creative process, is getting a song together. So I did, you know, I started with scales, as I mentioned earlier, just probably from a book, I think. I had some folk guitar lessons. A really nice guy in Birmingham who taught me some tunes, which was good because it just got the fingers going a little bit. And then I had, when I moved down to the south, I found a guy in Brockenhurst who was a good classical guitar player, and he gave me classical guitar lessons. And I started taking grades in classical guitar. The big weakness for me was reading the music. I was hapless at it, really. Coming from the rock background, it's just, you know, I never took to that. So the higher up the grades I got, the more the expectation was you could read this stuff in front of you, and I was just, you know, the sight reading was a percentage of the test, so I just was dreading it. So I got to grade 6 or something, and I thought, I can't do any more of this. It was just too too much.
It was just self-taught, really. I learned a lot just by watching other people do stuff and trying to copy. That's the best way to learn, just copying what you see. And then eventually I made a band with 2 of my other mates from school. And that's when I really started to learn, you know, just every day practicing, because it was just like playing a video game. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, Xbox or something. I was addicted, so I used to be playing drums all the time. So I used to just try and just play what I heard. Do you know what I mean? And then, like, even then, years down the line, then I went to a few lessons, because when I went to uni, I went for music, and I had a drum teacher. Well, we could choose a drum teacher. So I had a few lessons with a guy called Bob Armstrong, who's just like a legend. And that's where I learned about rudiments, how to hold my sticks, how to even play mambo and salsa and the clave rhythm and all that stuff. That's when I started to learn about the rudiments of my 9 strokes, 5 strokes, 6 strokes, 7. He taught me all that stuff. Yeah, and then I really got into it. And then when I was playing, I used to just use them. When you're doing a roll, you'd be using these techniques without even realising, you know. And I think that was the aim of it. You learn all of that stuff, but then you just play, and then it just happens.
When I decided that I wanted to be a professional musician, I was studying A-levels at the time, and managed to join this local band that were working a lot. And at that point, I was unsure what to do with my life, whether to kind of go down to the university track or find something else. And luckily, music kind of found me. And as soon as I started music and I started hanging out with those musicians, life made a lot more sense to me. So at that point I decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to play drums, I'm going to be a musician, this is what is getting me excited. And at that point, everything else, I almost became blinkered. You know? I became very focused, and I literally locked myself in my garage with my drum kit for 8 hours a day, Monday to Friday. I thought, I'm going to treat this like not like a proper job, but I'm going to treat it with that seriousness. So I essentially started by locking myself in that room and playing all day long, playing anything and everything I could. I'm naturally obsessive, and naturally I tend to get focused with stuff, and I don't know why. I think there's probably some psychological reason to do my dad more than likely, but I focus very intently on what I want to do. I'll decide I'm going to do something, and I won't look up until I've done it. Right. And in this case, I've not looked up for 20 years. So that's literally been the case. That's a long drumming session. Yeah. I decided I wanted to do it. I loved it, and that was release for me, finding that thing that I wanted to do. And I just applied myself to it relentlessly. My talent, as opposed to my application, is way more weighted in terms of application than talent. I've got enough talent, but I'm obsessive and won't give up, and just keep going until I've got some success. So that's the thing that I'd attribute the success I've been lucky enough to have, is just pure bloody mindedness.
Well, I had private violin lessons with a teacher. You kind of go through progression and you do the grades. I did competitions and things, and that meant I then we moved as a family up to Perth in Western Australia, and I got into music school, specialist music school. Heard orchestral music for the first time when I was 13. Got through the school, but then I was still obviously having private lessons beyond grade 8 and learning lots of other stuff. And basically people around me said, you know, you should be going to music college. It was a bit of a shock, because his technique was to take you right back to the beginning. Okay. Because obviously when you're young, you learn habits. You learn quite bad habits, and like you hold the violin in a bit of a strange way. Okay. And so his way was to take everyone right back to the beginning and work their way back up, doing very slow finger exercises. I wasn't allowed to play the violin for 6 months, which was slightly as in make a noise. I did all the motions, but I wasn't allowed to make a noise.
Really?
So yeah. It's really, I mean, it can be psychologically really difficult. Some people found it incredibly tough. I think it's a really good way of doing it. I mean, it's very zen, but it really, I think you really have to focus on yourself and why you're there and what you're doing, and are you really interested? Yeah. In a way, it weeds out the people who aren't interested.
I did do grades on the piano to a point. I think I went to grade 7 or 8, and I played in the school orchestra. I played violin at school in that, and I was in the school choir for 2 weeks until they discovered I couldn't sing and booted me. But really, it became apparent quite early on that what I loved doing was making music, and while learning it in the traditional sense fed into making it, I just wanted to spend all my time creating sounds and making my own music. So the other stuff took less and less of a focal point. And I did violin and piano, and then I started doing organ for a bit, but my sight reading isn't the best, and having to read pedal notes as well as the other staves was a bit too complicated for me. All I would really do is come home and play piano. That was kind of my main focus in life. And then at the age of 11, I got a computer, and that's when not just recording my piano improvisations, but making music in an electronic way opened up. Yeah. And so I ended up that's all I did in all my spare time, is make music on a computer.
Well, I had a few people show me a few things. Like, there was a neighbour of mine who was an older kid who was a guitarist and showed me a few things. An amazing jazz guitarist called Billy Jenkins showed me a few things. He had jam sessions in the basement of his parents' house, and I used to go to those sometimes. Although Billy told me quite often, he told me, you should give up this, you're not going to be very good at it. And I thought, well, you know, F you, show me this anyway. And he spent a bit of patient time with me, but mostly I didn't have any training or anything. It was just about playing records, and I happened to have a pretty good ear. Yeah. And picking up, playing along with Wishbone Ash records or Thin Lizzy records or Mark Bolan records, or the kind of things where you could quite easily copy stuff, and then it leads on to slightly more sophisticated things, Led Zeppelin or a bit of Frank Zappa or a bit of something, and you start copying things. Yeah. And that's what it was for me. It was monkey see, monkey do. I just copied and worked on records until I could play something like what I was hearing on the records. I kind of wish that I'd learned a bit more about. I have got to a stage where I can slowly read a page of classical guitar music and play it, and it's gone again now. And I'd learnt that at one point and sort of let it slip again. But I kind of appreciate the fact that if I'd been able to read music off the page and sight read music as a guitar player, I would have at some point in my life ended up in an orchestra pit playing in a theatre, and I'm bloody glad that never happened. I think music theory, it matters if you want to be a classical musician. And it probably matters if you want to be a jazz musician too, although there were very good self-taught jazz musicians. But as a rock musician, it's a real optional thing. You don't really have to learn to read music.
I learned by that tape recorder thing, having the tape recorder, listening to tunes that I loved and winding it back and working out the bass line. That was it. That that back in the day, you didn't have all these things. So yeah, that's how I went. I had lessons on guitar for a really short period of time. Couldn't stand it. It was a classical sort of thing. So that's made me realise how important, you get a good teacher who's going to motivate you. So it was self-motivated, and I had a couple of mates who were totally into the music as well. So between us, we would work out these tunes, and so I'm self-taught in that way. And I didn't really get into until I was about 17, 18, at that point I kind of knew that I kind of wanted to do music, but I needed to understand more about, how music's even put together. So that's at that point I realised I needed to get some help outside, so I did, yeah. Yeah, I didn't start reading music until I was about 17, 18, and it was a drag, But it was a drag, but it was kind of important. It opened up the gateway for me understanding music that I've listened to, just copying, but not really understanding what the hell was going on. So, but, I've got a thing about that. I think I'm glad I started by just using my ear. Once I started understanding the theory of music, the doors unlocked quite quickly. I don't obsess about it. I'm still not a great reader and stuff, but I was already at a certain level, and using my ear and I recommend that to students all the time, it's just listening to something and try and pick it up. That's just a great way to learn. Though, if I'd done both, if I'd had theory, I would have loved to have done that, but that wasn't the way I did it, and I don't have regrets about that.
I found out pretty quickly that I'm a singer and a songwriter, and I play a lot of other instruments. I play guitar, keyboards, I also play the flute. Academic music was something that was a nightmare for me, because my parents figured out really kind of early on that I was musical because of the way what I was doing and how I was behaving. And I had piano lessons and organ lessons. And when I got to school, I struggled through going through O-level music. I used to have a piano teacher called Mrs. Birchinall. Margaret Birchinall was her name. Really good lady. But I was crafty because if she put sheet music down, I would make her play it, and then I would copy it by ear, because my ear was faster than my sight reading, and that's still the case. I mean, I do read, but it's something that I have to apply myself to. But I do things instinctively. I work directly with sound on sound.
I've got this belief that application, as long as you've got enough of the good stuff, the talent, that will see you through. There's a lot of people in the world with tons and tons of talent that never get anywhere because they can't apply themselves to it. So just do that. Just apply yourself. Don't give up. And the bigger success came to me a bit later. So don't give up. Go for it.
I think my parents love it. You know, I'd get my mum in here now, but unfortunately, you haven't got long enough on this programme.